Why does doing the right thing sometimes feel wrong? You stay kind, you stay calm, you do what's expected, and still something feels off, like a small part of you had to stay quiet just to keep everything okay. Not pain, not guilt, just a quiet misalignment you can't ignore. Let's understand why being good can slowly disconnect you from yourself. There's a quiet kind of confusion that doesn't show up right away. It comes later, usually when everything is already done. You say yes when someone needs help, even though you're already tired, and in that moment it feels right, almost automatic, like your body made the decision before your mind had time to think. You stay a little longer, give a little more, listen a little deeper, because that's who you've always tried to be. But then, later, when everything goes quiet again, something shifts. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, just a small weight sitting somewhere in your chest, hard to name, harder to explain. You start replaying the moment, not the good part, not the part where you helped, but the part where you felt something in yourself get pushed aside. A need, maybe, a limit, a quiet voice that didn't get heard. And that's where it begins to feel strange, because you did something good, something most people would praise, something that fits perfectly into what we're taught is right. So why does it feel off? Not wrong in a clear way, but misaligned, like something inside you moved out of place just a little. It can happen in small moments. You agree to something you didn't want. You forgive faster than you were ready to. You stay calm when something actually hurt. From the outside, it all looks like strength, maturity, kindness. But inside, there's a quiet cost, and it doesn't show up immediately. It waits until you're alone, until the conversation ends, until there's nothing left to distract you. Then it comes back, not as anger, not even as sadness, but as a subtle sense of discomfort that doesn't have a clear reason. You might tell yourself you're overthinking, that this is just what being a good person requires, that everyone feels this sometimes, and maybe that's true. But there's a difference between doing something good and feeling like you had to disappear a little to do it. That difference is easy to miss, especially if you've been taught over time that your role is to be the one who understands, who adapts, who gives without needing much in return. You become someone who can read the room quickly, who notices what others need before they even say it, who adjusts without being asked. And at first, it feels like a strength. People appreciate you, they trust you, they come to you. But slowly, something else starts to grow underneath that. A quiet question, one that doesn't come with clear words, just a feeling. Where am I in all of this? Not in a selfish way, not in a demanding way, just present or not. Because when you're always the one adjusting, always the one understanding, always the one giving, it becomes harder to notice when something inside you is asking to be held too. And when that part doesn't get space, it doesn't disappear. It waits. It shows up in the silence after everything is done, in the small moments where you feel oddly distant from yourself. Like you played a role so well, you forgot where it ended. And this is where being a good person starts to feel confusing. Not because kindness is wrong, but because something about the way it's happening feels incomplete. It's like reading a story where one character is always helping everyone else, but never has a moment of their own. At some point, you stop focusing on what they're doing and start wondering what they're not saying. Because even the most selfless actions still come from a human place. And humans aren't built to only give. They're built to exist too. To feel, to need, to hesitate, to say no sometimes, to take up space without apologizing for it. But when that part gets ignored for too long, something subtle begins to change. Kindness becomes heavier. Patience becomes thinner. And the things that once felt natural start to feel like something you have to maintain. Not because you stopped caring, but because you started carrying something quietly along with it. And the strange part is, no one else sees it. From the outside, you're still the same person, still reliable, still kind, still good, which makes it even harder to explain, even to yourself. Because how do you question something that looks so right? How do you admit that doing the right thing sometimes leaves you feeling a little lost? This is where many people stop exploring. They push the feeling aside, tell themselves it's just part of life, part of growing up, part of being someone others can depend on. And maybe part of that is true. But there's also something deeper happening here, something quieter, more personal, something that doesn't get talked about enough. Because not all good actions come from the same place. Sometimes they come from genuine care, but sometimes they come from something else entirely. And if you don't pause long enough to notice the difference, you can spend a long time being someone everyone appreciates, while slowly losing touch with the part of you that needed to be included too. If you sit with that feeling a little longer, without rushing to fix it or dismiss it, you start to notice something subtle. The discomfort doesn't come from the act itself. It comes from where it came from, because not all kindness is the same. There's a kind that feels light, almost effortless. You give, and there's no echo afterward, no second guessing, no quiet exhaustion, just a sense that something moved naturally through you. That kind of goodness doesn't leave a mark. It doesn't ask for anything back, not even recognition. But then there's another kind, quieter, more complicated. The kind that looks identical on the outside, but feels heavier on the inside. You still help. You still show up. You still say yes. But underneath, there's tension. Not obvious, not loud, but present. It might come from a fear of disappointing someone, or the discomfort of being seen as difficult, or the quiet belief that saying no might change how people see you. And so, without fully realizing it, your kindness begins to carry something else along with it. A kind of protection, a kind of control, a way to keep things smooth, predictable, safe. You become the one who prevents conflict, the one who absorbs awkwardness, the one who makes sure everything stays okay. And over time, that role becomes so natural you stop noticing it's a role at all. It just feels like you. But there's a difference between who you are and what you've learned to become. And that difference is often where the discomfort begins. Because when kindness starts to come from pressure instead of choice, it loses something. It's still good, still helpful, still appreciated, but it's no longer fully yours. It becomes something you perform, even if you don't mean to. And performance, no matter how quiet, always takes energy. That's why it doesn't feel good anymore. Not because you don't care, but because you're no longer fully present in the act of caring. Part of you is there, offering, listening, supporting, but another part is watching closely, making sure everything stays right, making sure nothing goes wrong, making sure you don't become the reason something feels uncomfortable. And that second part, the one that monitors, adjusts, calculates, that's the part that gets tired. It's subtle, but it changes everything. Because now, kindness is no longer just about connection. It becomes about managing outcomes, managing how others feel, managing how you're perceived, managing the space so carefully that there's almost no room left for you to exist freely inside it. And the more you do it, the more automatic it becomes. You don't pause to ask, Do I want to do this? You just feel, I should. And that word, should, carries a quiet weight. It sounds reasonable, responsible, even admirable. But it slowly replaces something more important: choice. Because when kindness comes from choice, it feels alive. When it comes from should, it starts to feel like something you owe. And when you feel like you owe kindness, you stop experiencing it as something meaningful and start experiencing it as something required. That's when the emotional shift happens. That's when helping someone doesn't bring peace. It brings a strange kind of relief, like you avoided something worse. And that relief isn't the same as fulfillment. It's just the absence of tension. But the tension doesn't disappear completely. It just moves. It shows up later, in small ways, in the moments where you feel unexpectedly distant, or quietly irritated without knowing why, or slightly disconnected from something that used to feel simple. And if you don't slow down to notice it, it can turn into something even quieter, but deeper. A gradual feeling that something about you is being left behind. Not all at once, not in a way that's easy to point to, but piece by piece. A boundary you didn't speak, a feeling you didn't express, a need you didn't acknowledge, each one small, almost unimportant on its own. But together, they create a pattern. And patterns, when repeated long enough, start to feel like identity. You begin to see yourself as the one who handles things, the one who understands, the one who doesn't make things harder for others. And again, none of that is wrong. But if that becomes the only version of you that gets to exist, then something important gets lost. Because being a good person was never meant to mean being invisible in your own life. It was never meant to mean that your needs come last, every time, or that your feelings have to be adjusted before they're allowed to exist. But when kindness becomes tied to approval, or safety, or identity, it becomes harder to separate what you truly feel from what you think you're supposed to feel. And that's where the confusion deepens. Because now, even when you try to pause, even when you try to ask yourself what you really want, the answer isn't clear anymore. There's hesitation, uncertainty, a kind of internal silence where something used to be, not because it's gone, but because it hasn't been listened to in a long time. And so being a good person starts to feel wrong, not because it is, but because somewhere along the way, it stopped including you. In the next section, we'll move deeper into that hidden conflict. The part most people don't talk about, where this pattern begins to take shape, and why it becomes so difficult to step out of it once it feels like who you are. If this content speaks the words you can't explain, click subscribe. Thank you for your support. There's a part of this that most people never say out loud, not because it's complicated, but because it feels uncomfortable to admit. Sometimes, being a good person isn't just about being kind. Sometimes, it's about staying safe. Not physically, but emotionally. Safe from rejection. Safe from conflict. Safe from that subtle shift in someone's tone. The moment where you feel like you've disappointed them. And if you've felt that before, even just once in a way that stayed with you, your mind learns something quietly. It learns that harmony matters, that being liked matters, that being easy to deal with keeps things calm. So you adapt, not all at once, not in a way you notice, but slowly. You start choosing your words more carefully. You soften your opinions. You hold back parts of yourself that might create friction, and none of it feels fake. It feels responsible, like you're doing the mature thing, the thoughtful thing, the right thing. But underneath that, there's something else forming, a quiet agreement with yourself. I'll keep things smooth, even if it costs me something. And at first, that cost is small. You don't say what you really felt in a conversation. You agree to something you weren't fully comfortable with. You let something slide because bringing it up feels heavier than staying quiet. It seems harmless, even wise. But over time, that pattern doesn't stay small. Because every time you choose silence over honesty, every time you prioritize peace over truth, every time you adjust yourself to avoid discomfort, you send yourself a quiet message. My feelings can wait. My needs are not urgent. Keeping things okay matters more than being real. And the mind, it listens, it takes that message and starts to build around it. That's when something deeper begins to happen. You stop checking in with yourself, not because you don't care, but because it no longer feels necessary. Your focus shifts outward. What do they need? How will this affect them? What keeps everything balanced? And again, none of that is wrong. But when it becomes your default, something inside you begins to fade into the background. Not disappear, just quiet down. And the quieter it gets, the harder it is to hear when it actually matters. This is where the internal conflict starts to take shape. Because on the surface, everything looks fine. You're still kind, still thoughtful, still someone people rely on. But inside, there's tension. Not loud, not explosive, just steady. A feeling that something isn't fully aligned, even if you can't explain why. And the hardest part is, you can't easily stop, because this way of being, it doesn't feel like a choice anymore. It feels like who you are. You've been this person for so long, the one who understands, who adjusts, who keeps things from falling apart. That imagining anything different feels unfamiliar, almost wrong, like you'd be betraying something or someone, or even yourself. So even when you notice the discomfort, even when you feel that quiet weight after doing something good, you don't question the pattern. You question yourself. Why do I feel like this? Why can't I just be okay with helping? Why does something so simple feel so complicated? And instead of seeing it as a signal, you see it as a flaw. But it's not a flaw. It's a response that started somewhere. Usually in moments that felt small at the time, but left an impression. Maybe it was a time when being honest didn't go well, when expressing a need made things harder, when saying no led to distance or tension or disappointment. And even if those moments were subtle, your mind learned from them. It learned that being easy keeps connection, that being agreeable keeps things stable, that being good prevents something from going wrong. So you hold on to that, not consciously, not deliberately, but automatically. And over time, that becomes the way you move through the world. You anticipate, you adjust, you soften, you give. And again, it works. People feel comfortable around you, things don't escalate, relationships stay intact. But there's something that doesn't get counted in all of that. The internal cost. The part where you start to feel like you're always one step ahead of yourself, always filtering, always managing, always holding something back. And that constant awareness, that quiet self-monitoring. It doesn't feel like pressure at first. It feels like control. But control, when it's always on, slowly turns into tension. Because you're never fully at rest. Even in calm moments, part of you is still paying attention, still making sure everything stays okay. And that's where the exhaustion comes from. Not from being kind, but from never being fully present inside your own kindness. And as this pattern continues, something even quieter begins to happen, something that's harder to notice because it doesn't feel like a problem at first. It feels like identity. You don't just act like the understanding one anymore. You become the understanding one. You don't just help sometimes, you become the person people expect help from. And slowly, without a clear moment where it began, your value starts to feel tied to how well you can maintain that role. Not in an obvious way. No one sits you down and says it directly, but you feel it in small reactions, the appreciation when you're easy, the subtle shift when you're not, the way people lean on you, but rarely stop to ask what you might be holding. And at some point, it stops feeling like something you offer and starts feeling like something you have to keep up. That's where the pressure deepens, because now it's not just about avoiding discomfort. It's about preserving how you're seen. If you change, if you start saying no, if you begin to express something less convenient, there's a quiet fear that something will shift. Maybe people will pull away. Maybe they'll see you differently. Maybe they won't need you in the same way. And that last part is where it becomes more complicated than it seems. Because being needed, even in a quiet, subtle way, can feel like connection. It can feel like proof that you matter, that you belong somewhere. So without realizing it, you begin to protect that. You protect the role. You protect the image. You protect the version of yourself that others have learned to rely on. Even if, inside, it's starting to feel heavy. And this is where the conflict becomes almost invisible, because from the outside, everything still works. You're still kind, still dependable, still someone people trust. Nothing is breaking. Nothing is clearly wrong. But inside, something feels stretched. Like you're constantly balancing between who you are and who you feel expected to be. And the longer that balance continues, the more unstable it becomes. Because expectations don't stay the same. Once people get used to a certain version of you, they begin to assume it, not out of malice, not even consciously, but naturally. They expect you to understand, to be flexible, to handle things without needing much back. And the moment you don't, even in a small way, it creates a shift. Sometimes it's subtle, a pause, a different tone, a quiet confusion. Other times, it's more direct, a question, a reaction, a sense that you've done something unexpected. And even if that reaction isn't harsh, it still lands somewhere inside you, because it touches that same place. The one that learned long ago that keeping things smooth matters. So you adjust again. You explain more than you need to. You soften your boundaries. You try to make your no feel less like a no. And in doing that, you slowly move back into the role that feels familiar, even if it no longer feels right. This is why it's so difficult to change. Not because you don't see the pattern, but because stepping out of it doesn't just affect you. It affects how others experience you. And that's where the fear lives. Because change, even healthy change, creates uncertainty. And uncertainty, for a mind that learned to keep things stable, feels uncomfortable. So even when you start to notice the truth, even when you realize that something about your kindness feels misaligned, there's a hesitation, a quiet question that lingers. If I stop being this version of myself, what happens next? And there's no immediate answer, just a space, unfamiliar, uncertain, a little uncomfortable. So instead of stepping into it, you step back. Not fully, not consciously, but just enough to stay where things still feel manageable. And that's how the cycle continues. You become more aware, but not fully free. You notice the discomfort, but still move the same way. You feel the misalignment, but don't quite trust yourself enough to change it. And over time, that creates a deeper kind of exhaustion. not just from giving, but from knowing and still feeling stuck. Because there's a difference between not knowing something is off and knowing it, but not feeling able to act on it. That second place is heavier. It carries a quiet frustration, not toward others, but toward yourself. A sense that you should be able to shift this, that it shouldn't be this hard, that something so small, just saying no, just being honest, shouldn't feel so complicated. But it does. Because it's not just about the moment in front of you, it's about everything underneath it, the patterns, the experiences, the identity that's been shaped slowly over time. And until that deeper layer is understood, the surface will always feel harder to change. So being a good person continues to feel wrong, not because goodness itself is the problem, but because it became tied to something that was never meant to carry that weight. In the next section, we'll begin to separate those two things, gently, without force, without losing what makes you kind, and without asking you to become someone you're not, just someone more complete within yourself. So maybe the shift isn't about becoming less kind, and it's not about suddenly changing who you are, or pulling away from people, or becoming someone colder, more distant. It's something quieter than that. It's about where your kindness begins, because up until now, most of it may have started outside of you, in what someone else needed, in what the moment required, in what kept things calm, smooth, acceptable. And there's nothing wrong with noticing those things, but when they become the starting point every time, you slowly lose access to something important: yourself. So the first step isn't a big action. It's not saying no to everything or setting perfect boundaries overnight. It's something much smaller. It's a pause, a brief moment. Before you respond, before you agree, before you step into that familiar role, where you ask yourself quietly, what do I actually feel right now? Not what makes sense, not what's expected, not what would make this easier for everyone else, just what is already there. At first, the answer might not come clearly. There might be hesitation or silence, or even a sense that nothing is there at all. And that's okay, because that part of you, the one that hasn't been asked in a long time, it doesn't speak loudly right away. It waits. But if you keep creating that small space, even just for a few seconds, something begins to return. A feeling, a preference, a limit, not always strong, not always clear, but present. And that presence is where things begin to change. Because once you start including yourself in the moment, kindness stops being something you perform and starts becoming something you choose. And choice, even in small amounts, changes the entire experience. You might still help, you might still say yes, but it feels different, lighter, because now you're not disappearing to do it. You're there, inside the action, not outside of it. And that doesn't mean every moment will feel easy. There will be times when what you feel doesn't match what someone else expects. Moments where your honesty creates a slight tension, or your boundary feels unfamiliar to others. And in those moments, the old instinct will come back, to soften it, to adjust, to go back to what feels safe. But instead of fighting that instinct, you can just notice it. You can let it exist without immediately following it. That alone is already a shift. Because for the first time, you're not reacting automatically. You're choosing, even if the choice is small. And over time, those small choices begin to build something new. Not a completely different version of you, but a more balanced one. Someone who can still care deeply, but doesn't have to disappear to prove it. Someone who can still be kind, but doesn't feel responsible for everything staying okay. Someone who understands, but also allows themselves to be understood. And this balance, it doesn't come from forcing change. It comes from allowing space. Space for your feelings to exist, even when they're inconvenient. Space for your needs to matter, even when they're small. Space for you to be part of your own life again. Because the truth is, being a good person was never supposed to feel wrong. It only started to feel that way when you were left out of the equation. So instead of trying to fix your kindness, you begin to include yourself in it. And that changes everything, slowly, gently, without losing what makes you who you are. There's a moment, small, almost invisible, where things begin to feel different. Not because everything is suddenly resolved, but because something inside you is no longer being ignored. You start to notice it in ordinary situations, a conversation where you don't rush to agree, a request where you pause a little longer before answering, a feeling that you let exist without immediately adjusting it to fit the moment. Nothing dramatic happens, no big reaction, no sudden change in how people treat you. But inside, there's a quiet shift, a sense that you're no longer stepping out of yourself to keep everything okay. And at first, that can feel unfamiliar, even uncomfortable, because you're used to things being smooth, predictable, controlled. Now, there's a little more uncertainty, a little more space. And space can feel strange when you're not used to having it. But that space is where something important grows. Not confidence in a loud, obvious way, but trust. A quiet trust in yourself. The kind that doesn't come from doing everything right, but from knowing you're no longer leaving yourself behind. And that trust, it changes how you move. You begin to speak a little more honestly, not harshly, not forcefully, just clearly. You begin to set small boundaries, not as walls, but as edges that define where you end and someone else begins. And you begin to notice something surprising. Most of the things you were afraid would happen don't happen in the way you imagined. People might pause, adjust, take time to understand. But the world doesn't collapse. Connections don't disappear overnight. And the ones that matter often become more real. Because now, they're not built on a version of you that was constantly adjusting. They're built on something more honest. And yes, there will still be moments of discomfort, moments where someone doesn't understand, moments where you feel that old instinct to go back, to make it easier, smoother, more familiar. But instead of seeing that discomfort as something to avoid, you can begin to see it as something natural, not a sign that you're doing something wrong, but a sign that something new is taking shape. Because growth, especially this kind, is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It shows up in small decisions, repeated over time. And slowly, the feeling that once made being a good person feel wrong begins to change. Not because you stopped being good, but because you stopped doing it in a way that erased you. Kindness becomes something you offer again, not something you owe. And when that happens, it feels different, more grounded, more real, more yours. So if something in this story felt familiar, if you've ever walked away from doing the right thing and felt strangely disconnected from it, you don't need to change everything at once. You don't need to become someone new. Just begin here. With one moment, one pause, one honest check-in with yourself before you move. And let that be enough for now. Because the version of you that includes yourself isn't further away. It's already there, just waiting to be heard again. And if you're ready to keep exploring that, to understand these patterns more deeply and gently reshape them over time, stay with this journey. There's more to uncover, more to feel, more to understand, and somewhere along the way, You might find that being a good person finally feels like something that includes you, too.